Hello, I'm John Feldt. This is the weekly Water Outlook Midwest edition. This is the jet stream pattern last week. I mentioned that we'd have a ridge of high pressure in the west and this generally area of low pressure in the east. We've had that for a couple weeks now. A couple weeks ago it was highly amplified. This week wasn't quite so much, but we still had this very strong prevailing pattern of this ridge of high pressure in the west and then dipping down in the east. Generally speaking, under this area of high pressure, we'd be talking about dry and hot weather. Under this area of low pressure, we'd be talking about cool and showery weather. Now, those are generalities, and there can be some big differences between what I just mentioned and what might have occurred. Now, if we look at the precipitation over the Midwest, what you see is a very quiet pattern over the last 7 days. Blue is only half an inch or less. So generally, most of the Midwest was very quiet last week with either no rain, and you can see some pockets of Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois received no rain at all, or light amounts of rain. Now, the areas that did receive some significant rain included southern Illinois, parts of Indiana and Ohio. We had some thunderstorms develop around St. Louis and sag south over southern Illinois. But again, for the most part, to a large extent, a very dry week. Now, in the past 7 days, the surplus or deficit rainfall, yellow is deficit, so most of the Midwest has received about 1 to 2 inches less than normal rainfall, and that's going to have to be made up sometime over the next couple months. We're sort of dug into a hole over the last week, and we lost about 1 inch or 2 of rain. So hopefully what we will see at some point in time, hopefully in the near future for many of these areas, is some beginning to get into that green and purple or increasing amounts of rain for the week. Now, if we go back a little bit further, the 30 days surplus or deficit, we see that pattern from Minnesota up into down into across Wisconsin into Illinois and Indiana and Ohio. That's been wet. So from a longer term perspective, we're still seeing that this area in here has been somewhat wet, even though in the short term last week it was dry. But this is the area here, southeastern half of Iowa, western parts of Missouri, most of Kansas, parts of Nebraska. That is getting quite dry, both in the short term and now beginning to work into the long term as well. So if we look at the number of rain days, green means that there have been a lot of rain days in the last 30 days. So you can see that dark green, that was at least 11 to 15, and that was in that active track of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. But then if we look into Kansas and scattered parts of Missouri, quite a bit less in this region right here. We get into that brown, that's only 4 or 6 days of rain, and that dark brown is only about 3 days of rain over the last 30 days. We look at the maximum consecutive dry days, look at that brown. That's 15 to 20 consecutive days in a row without rain. We see up in the upper Midwest that green, so that's 6 to 8 days. And that's saying that this dry trend has been relatively recent over the last couple weeks, building into the parts of the Midwest. Prior to that, we've actually had a frequency of rain that was fairly normal, if not above normal. So we are having some changing soil moisture anomalies. I wanted to point that out. This is through July 6th, and we see green, which is above normal soil moisture to the east of this line. And then we see here to the west of this line, below normal soil moisture. And sort of in the middle here, it's classified as normal. But with this below normal rainfall that we've received over the last week, I would really expect to see this area of orange start to push gradually to the east into the western part of Iowa, western part of Missouri over the next week. So how much rain is needed to bring conditions, the Palmer Drought Index, back to normal? Well, you can see over most of the Midwest, it's considered in the normal range currently. But like I said, I think this is going to be gradually spreading off into the east. So we see now need up to 3 inches of rain over eastern parts of Nebraska and Kansas, 6 inches or more over the western part. I think that's going to gradually be shifting into parts of Iowa, up into South Dakota and western Missouri over the next week, with getting into that first range of yellow traced to 3 inches. So let's look at the big picture. This is a jet stream. If this looks familiar to you, this has really been the pattern we've seen now for a number of weeks, and it looks like it's going to continue for a while as well. What we have here is we have the ridge of high pressure over the west, low pressure over the east, and little pockets of energy moving along that jet stream. Most of the energy is going to be east over the eastern parts of the Midwest in this region right here, and that's where we'd expect the better chances of rain. Over the western parts of the Midwest, west of this line, it's going to be more dominated by that ridge of high pressure, and that's going to be that warm and dry type pattern that we've seen. So really, this is very similar to what we've seen over the last week or so. And if we look into the 6 to 10 day period, there are some subtle changes here. And one of the things I wanted to mention is even though this pattern remains in place with that ridge of high pressure, there are some signs that an area of low pressure could develop and sort of drift off to the west, and that might bring a better chance of rain in the 6 to 14 day period. But we'll have to see. That's, I think, right now somewhat iffy. One of the things with these dashed lines, dashed red or dashed blue, you don't see a lot of them over the U.S. That means that patterns are fairly close to normal for summertime. So here's the rain forecast for the next 7 days. I think the signals that I have the highest confidence in are the dry signals over the west and the south, and the wet signal over the east. I think the rain over the Midwest, a very large area of the Midwest right here, anywhere in here, hopefully we'll get that because I think it's really needed in parts of this area here. But I think the coverage and the intensity, the probabilities is somewhat uncertain at this time where that will fall. If we look at the soil moisture forecast, it does look like soils will continue to dry out over most of the Midwest over the next week. Now here's the 6 to 10 day forecast. This is a model outlook. Yellow are higher amounts of rain, sort of flipped around from some of the other maps I've showed you. I think right now how I would interpret this is just scattered type precipitation in the 6 to 10 day outlook. This does not look to me like there's a really good handle on where it might occur, but at least it's putting some chance of rain over the Midwest. Looks like right now, if we believe this model, the area that has been wet, parts of Illinois, Indiana, and eastern Missouri might dry out. Areas of west might get more rain. But like I said, I don't have a lot of high confidence in that. 8 to 14 day outlook, you can see that much of the nation is covered with above normal precipitation. That's in green. But really, I really think we're getting into a period of a fairly low confidence as far as where precipitation will occur. I think I will say I have a fairly high confidence that it's not going to be completely dry, but a very high confidence it's not going to be extremely wet as well. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: parts of the western Midwest need rain. There will be some scattered showers and storms this week, with some difficulty predicting exactly where they will occur or when they will occur. We will be in a weak summer pattern that will continue right through the end of July. Looks like the very best chances of rain will be the northern tier of the U.S., right where the energy is the strongest. Thank you for listening to this week's briefing of the Weekly Water Outlook. I'll be talking with you again next Sunday.